Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Gamefromscratch, and last week we had Unreal Fest 2023. This is Epic Games' annual developer conference. Normally it's about Unreal Engine only, but these days they've got UEFN and then all the other various different things that they're working on right now. But for the most part, this is kind of a rundown of everything going on in the world of Unreal Engine. And we didn't really get much out of this news-wise. We had a bit of an unfortunate pricing change news that came out of it, mostly a misunderstanding. I've done videos about that, so I'm not going to reiterate on that there, but there was something pretty major that actually came about because of Unreal Fest, and that's what we're going to be covering today. It's a very minor topic called the future of Unreal Engine. Now, that might sound a little overwrought, but no, that's exactly what it is. They have something called the public roadmap, and they have made some pretty massive updates to it. So this has gone all along, so you can see, going back to Unreal Engine 4.26, the various different features that they were going to add in the version that we were talking about. The last version we dealt with was Unreal Engine 5.3, which is out and released. And one thing to know about Unreal Engine is it builds upon itself. So we're going to see a lot of things today that were, for example, already released. So in Unreal Engine 5.3, we got an experimental release of the substrate material system. We're going to hear a little bit more about substrates going forward. We also got the sparse volume textures. Well, the rendering technology behind that is getting some improvements. So that's what we're going to do today. We're looking at the forward-looking. This is essentially the coming soon portion for Unreal Engine. Now, one thing I want you to be aware of is this paragraph right here. This is the disclaimer. This board reflects some of our current Unreal Engine development paths, and we intend to update it regularly. This is not a commitment on which release or date any feature could ship. All plans are tentative and subject to change without notice. So although they announced this is what they are working on, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen for sure. Also, anything marked as experimental, there's pretty good possibility that it could go nowhere. Just one of those things to be aware of when you are talking about Unreal Engine. So what we're going to do is go through category by category, and we're going to start things off with rendering. Now, when it comes to rendering, there's always a ton of stuff in Unreal Engine, but interestingly on the roadmap, almost everything here is just an improvement on an existing system. So for example, Unreal Engine 5.3 added spline meshes as an experimental implementation. This is what you would use for doing, say, roads over top of a train. They're doing improvements there, ongoing, making it work better, etc., having it support for streaming. Virtual shadow maps are being improved. Large world coordinates were announced earlier on. Now they have added GPU functionality and the ability to only admit it when you actually need it for performance reasons. Large world coordinates are going to enable you to go to double precision transforms and data types for your positioning in the world. What this means is your worlds can go from being 21 kilometers in size to 88 million kilometers in size, but this was actually announced a few versions back. Another thing that was announced a few versions back was Substrate. This is a new texturing system. You can think of it as like PBR on steroids. So it gives you the ability to do things like gloss and fleck if you're doing paint, translucency, stuff that you couldn't capture now. Nice thing about this is it has now hit beta status. So it used to be experimental in 5.3, it was experimental. So this basically means that Substrate is going to happen. Now, it was pretty obvious Substrate was going to happen. It was one of the marquee features at GDC, and they're looking at making improvements. So first off, they want to make sure that the performance in real-world scenarios works, that it works the same level as legacy materials just using the new Substrate system, and they want to have user experience and workflow improvements as well. So nice to see that's in there, but that was all actually announced. We got some improvements to their temporal super resolution system. This is an upscaling technology that they use. So it's got some new features and visualization tools that are built in there, including a concept of history, so it can remember things it did in the past, so it doesn't have to recreate those. And then, yeah, path tracing is getting some improvements. Orthographic rendering was actually announced in a previous release. Optimized shader cook times, definitely one of those areas when it comes to, Unreal Engine that we would all fully embrace is actually having faster shader support. So that is an area they're working on. But for the most part, everything you see here in the world of rendering was already announced, except for this one is interesting. So I didn't actually know that hardware ray tracing wasn't a thing. And the reason why it's not a thing is because current generation, next gen consoles can't do it at 60 frames per second. So they're trying to get it down to 6 so that every 4 milliseconds hardware ray tracing will work with lumen lighting. But that that is one of the goals they've got, and this one is new. It's displacement maps for nanite meshes. You can think of this like normal maps. You know how you use a normal or displacement map on an existing low-resolution geometry, and instead of having to add new meshes or new triangles to your topology, you can just displace them using maps. Well, this is kind of the same thing, but with nanite, and ironically, it will actually generate meshing from these displacement maps. So you can use these displacement maps to actually draw generation of nanite meshes. Kind of an interesting approach there. Interestingly enough, it will also be workable with nanite landscapes. So instead of using a height map, you could displace a nanite surface using more or less like a height map that was driving nanite generation there, although there is, spoiler alert, some details about a new landscape system to come. So that is it for rendering. Moving on to the world of world building, pun totally intended, we've got a lot of things mostly behind the scenes. They're plumbing level details, something that aren't really that important to most of you. They're definitely going to make a change to how the tools actually work, but they're not going to make a lot of change to how do you work. For example, one file multiple actor allows you to put multiple actors into a single file, so you can cut down on the number of files in the system. This is currently being used in procedural generation solution. We got a lot of changements to how LODs will work. For example, you'll be able to see LODs directly inside of the editor, or this one, you're going to have multiple ways for how they're actually organized. So you can partition each object, holds their LOD layer settings, so you're going to have two new options for partition types: a loose hierarchical grid, a 3D grid where actors' extents are used to vary the streaming cells bounds, and level streaming, so use individual streaming per level per actor set in the runtime grid property. Probably the most exciting new thing here, though, is this guy right here. So you're going to have a next generation train solution. This is a completely new train system they're looking at developing, and this is going to take into account all the newer stuff that's built into Unreal Engine. Right now they use an old-fashioned height map only solution. This one is going to have 3D modeling, layering, virtual texture, generic editor tool, variable tessellation, and nanite support in it. So that's the big one for sure, is we're going to have a next generation train solution. Who knows when, but that is definitely a cool new feature. Next up, we have procedural content generation. Now, procedural content generation, or PCG, was literally just added in Unreal Engine 5.3, so we're just seeing a lot of, kind of incremental improvements to it. And interestingly enough, it is also being integrated into the UEFN, the Unreal Engine for Fortnite. But the big things here, so a lot of these are, just tweaks, new improvements, other new features. You'll now have microscattering, so if you're going to be doing, you can use GPU-based microscattering compute and nanite instancing for very high-frequency details over objects, like, for example, here you can see it with grass. Another neat thing is you're going to have non-destructive manual editing of PCG artifacts through selection, exclusion, modification, and restoring of points. And then probably the big one here is runtime hierarchical generation. So what this allows is to create richer dynamic environments, complex rules to be generated live, and larger procedural worlds as an automatic partitioning runtime execution solutions. Additionally, it can also greatly improve editor-only workflows and iteration by generating only around the camera or another actor with PCG generation source. So if you want to use the procedural generation stuff at runtime, this is going to make your life a nicer place. And then we've got other improvements. So we've got scripting improvements here. So scripting nodes using simple expression and or verse. Now there's one thing I was kind of hoping for in here is to see verse. That's their new scripting language for UEFN. Officially announced for Unreal Engine yet, but hasn't happened yet. And also metagraph is a higher level graph that allows you to define the execution schedule and priorities while being able to visualize and manage dependencies across PCG graphs within your scene. With that control over graphs' intertwined relations, you can adjust your procedural ecosystem in order to optimize processing, fix ordering, and find bottlenecks. It also allows productions that desire to compute procedurals on build machines to organize each process in a working order. So again, a lot of incremental improvements to the PCG stuff, but again, this is all brand new to Unreal Engine in general, so that's sort of what you would expect to see. So next up, we have the developer iteration category. This is basically why the hell are my build times so long? And there's a couple of really interesting things here. We've got the concept of runtime virtual assets. So reduce shipping build install footprint by installing bulk data from structured data within individual asset streaming delivery directly to the game client for faster playtest iterations and smaller first downloads for players. So basically server storage of assets, loading them in. We also have asynchronous loading, but one thing you may notice again and again here is we got Zen, 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 and so on. Well, what exactly is Zen? One of these had a very good documentation. Here we go. Zen Server is a new architecture for new local/shared data, Unreal Engine derived data cache. So data cache is basically where you put all things like cooked shaders, etc., like that. It provides improved cooking data, conditioning, and read-write performance by no longer storing cooked outputs as loose files on disk. Instead of time-consuming full copy deployments, this server component enables local network streaming of cooked data directly to the target platform for the game client. So your play on target, so when you're actually ready to run it on a device instead of in the editor, you can use the streaming functionality and the virtual runtime assets, etc., to remotely stream that stuff in. So the Zen server should make things faster. It's also going to work with build farms, etc. And this one is also super interesting, is you can actually take that the derived data cache and put it in the cloud now. So this is actually supported with AWS. So if you've got a team of people working and they're cooking all these options, and instead of having it all done locally and handled that way, you can actually deploy these into cloud if you've got a hybrid studio setup. So this efficiently shared cooked data between distributed team members with active passive region replication, auto connect to closest region, enterprise login, and authentication. So you can take advantage of those clouds to basically move the DCC, that cache, so that if you had a person working in Singapore, you could have it at like the Asian the Asian instance of Azure or AWS, or again, also Docker images available as well there. Or you can have it, North America, they would go to a local server, etc. So you can have all of this DDC stuff moved into the cloud. Pretty big change in that regard. Next up, we come to the platform category, and here you're going to see nothing amazing there, but we've got incremental improvements on Metal. So Metal is the OpenGL of Apple devices. So Apple support should get better. The Metal shader converter will be adopted to improve shader translation, resulting in faster compile times as well as improved code generation, leading to better runtime performances. Also, Metal CPP will be adopted to modernize the usage of Metal, which should result in better performance. So shader compilation on Mac should just basically get faster. When it comes to Vulkan, they're looking at bringing Vulkan up to par with DX12, including on the Linux platforms. This will allow full suite of ray tracing features to be used, including hit lighting mode in Lumen and path tracing. So they're bringing Vulkan up to parity with DirectX 3D12. And again, the Linux users are the ones that are going to benefit the most from there. Improvements to the world of XR. And then we've got the desktop deferred renderer will be supported on high-end mobile devices with the Vulkan RHI, allowing flagship features like Lumen and Nanite to run on these platforms. So that's actually pretty neat. So if you've got Vulkan support on your mobile devices, you might be able to get much higher-end graphics results out of this. Now, moving on into the world of character and animation tools, we're actually seeing just a lot of incremental improvements to things that were just recently announced. So, for example, the Bone and Skeletal editor here was just released in 5.3, and they're just going to kind of keep adding new functionality to it. So you're going to have component editor here, component snapping for bones, transform bones while painting, propagate bone changes. So basically, it's just going to work better. This one's also nice. You can copy, paste, and duplicate bones. So more of this functionality that you would normally do in your tool of choice, like Blender or Max or Maya or whatever, you're now going to be doing in Unreal Engine, and those tools are just going to slowly and incrementally improve. Again, Skeletal Editor was literally just added, so you expect to see improvements like that. Now, the machine learning deformer is another thing along these lines. This was released in Unreal Engine 5.2, I believe. So they're looking at basically future developments include debug filtering with option to connect to game and heat map against ground truth, ability to generate multiple geometry caches, noise filtering, LODs, etc. So basically that the machine learning skin deformer or muscle deformer is going to get better as well. You can have a framework for control rigs to be modularized and distributed as modules. So if you've got a rig to reuse, this should be nice. We will be adding new features to allow you to create character parts and assemble them into rigs for real-time or keyframe animation. I think this could actually be really cool if you had like, let's say like mech that you were building from pieces, or even I guess characters that were, you could have different body parts or different functionality, so you could build out a chunk of a rig and then kind of mix them all together real time and blend them in together with this new modular rigging system. And then we got a variety of other just kind of improvements to the overall animation tools here. Next up in the world of simulation, this is basically Chaos. That's their simulation, physics, and destruction engine. We're having a number of improvements there. On the topic of destruction, you're going to have a lot of neat new tools here, including things like a fracture editor with a new proximity tool. So you have finer finer control of data is generated and allowing it to be visualized. We've got some improvements, so a material-based shader system was added. Data flow allow geometry collection assets to be procedurally processed, an important aspect when dealing with hundreds to thousands of destructible items. More support for destruction with geometry collections, quality of life improvements, etc. So if you want to break stuff in your game, Chaos Destruction is getting even better. New features coming to Chaos are also Chaos Flesh. Now this one is really early on. It's basically, it works with their machine learning deformer. This is work towards moving more skin simulation stuff into Unreal Engine. Again, it sounds very early on. You're going to have new things like painting tools and USD caching support, and work with metahuman deformations as well as the ability to create procedural flesh setups for training. But again, this is all very early on. Also, by far and away the most terrifying name, Chaos Flesh. And we've also got the pattern and panel cloth. So the Chaos panel cloth development includes the continued work on experimental cloth editor. Much of the work will revolve around addressing the core Chaos cloth solver, providing for the support for denser meshes at faster simulation times. Other items of development include panel editor tools, more types of weight paint support, better runtime support, etc. Machine learning cloth updates include more support for nearest neighbor algorithm. So cloth improvements coming as well. And then we've got some debugging tools here as well for actually dealing with chaos. So their debugging platform has a disadvantage against engines like Havok or Physics, which have these visual debugging tools. So it's harder to debug in Chaos. That's something that they are looking to rectify. So that is the simulation side of things. Now, in the world of audio, we don't have a ton here. Some new plugins. There's a cross-player fader plug-and-play system. Now, this actually has been on the roadmap for a very long time. Well, you can mix between different sounds, automatically trigger mix states defined based on when your player or listener enters or exits an audio gameplay volume. We also have a plugin here for interactive music, so you can drive music with other elements that are already playing in the scenes. But again, this one is actually pretty well established on the play. I think it just keeps getting bumped back. These two are pretty much the only two plugins that are mentioned in this one directly. We have Metasounds. Metasounds is their new audio system. It was introduced in 5.0, I think. It's their new in-house audio system, so you don't have to work with things like, Fmod or another Weiss or something like that. So Presets Editor enables creators of Metasounds to create an organized presentation mode for their Metasound graph, which includes control over which inputs are exposed, and the overall layout makes Metasounds more accessible to users, so you control randomization for some input parameters, optionally use automation lanes for input parameter simulations while testing Metasounds, and customize the UI through UMG. And then there is a debugger here, Audio Insights debugger, and profile here. In the high priority features are audio event debugging, audio specific CPU memory performance, loudness and spectrum analyzer, and audio output recording. So this is definitely, more debugging tools are always a nice new feature. Next, we move on to frameworks, which is basically, the libraries of functionality that's pre-built into Unreal Engine. We got a couple of interesting improvements here. One of them is definitely the mass instance actors. So it's a framework for rendering large amounts of assets without the weight of full-blown actors. So the objective is to replace actors with mass and convert them on the fly to real actors when they need it. So it's kind of like a proxy system for lower resolution, lower CPU resource actors. So if you got a lot of things in a scene, I think this was first implemented as part of that Matrix demo we saw a while back. State tree debugger, again, more debugging tools are always a nice thing. We've got implementation of Microsoft's new game input API for Windows, so more out-of-the-box connectivity support for controllers. This is experimental at this point with things like racing wheels, flight sticks, PS4, PS5 controllers, Xbox, etc. Smart object improvements, so they are looking to make smart objects, which are currently very much Pawn AI focused, interactable by players, allow players to run gameplay interactions themselves and thus add a whole new layer of interactivity to your environment. Client-side predicted, thus are network replicant compliant, and then granting you the power to use these in your multiplayer game worlds. We've also got Mover 2.0. This is a plugin for doing character movement, so you kind of don't have to focus on writing this stuff yourself. So support for all actors, not just characters. Allow gameplay programs to focus on movement and less on the complexities of networking. Improved extensibility and customization through modularity and empowering non-engineers. Expanded gameplay possibilities, and generalized rollback networking support in there. Also have the ability to merge So they introduced data asset merging in 5.3, and they're now actually adding the possibility of merging data-only blueprints as opposed to full blueprint graphs. So again, some pretty smallish stuff, but a couple of nice improvements. We also have some improvements to the nav mesh and nav link system. Then in the world of modeling tools, we have two major announcements there. One is pretty simple, so we'll go there first. They're adding more tools for 2D work. Now, 2D stuff is generally things like textures, UV editing, vertex data, etc. So they're going to have increased tools for handling these things. So new things include UV editor, new visualization options, additional unwrapping functions, improved viewport functionality, new baking options in there. So if you're doing texture baking, that is an option inside of Unreal Engine, vertex and data maps, and more. So if you're fiddling around with texture maps, UV maps, etc., there's going to be more and more tooling built in. And then on the topic of 3D modeling tools, they're going to continue to develop those. It's kind of interesting that you're getting full fleshed out development tools in Unreal Engine. So eventually you may not need another tool out there like Blender Max or Maya or wherever, but this is so the modeling mode in UE and UEFN provides artist developers in every industry with a powerful range of tools. Doesn't matter where your geometry came from, so CAD or DCC or Fab, photogrammetry or modeling mode, so that you're actually be able to tweak any of those inside of the modeling tools. Modeling provides artists with an integrated set of tools for common modeling operations. In addition, the tools are extendable, so pipeline or technical artists can create custom tools. So you're going to have workflow and UX improvements. You're going to have improved consistent key shortcuts. You're going to have sculpting and mesh editing tools and more. So basically, they're just improving their modeling stuff across the board. I'm going to be really interested to see how far they lean into this, because if you haven't noticed, they added bone editing tools, animation tools, modular animation tools, 2D UV tools, and 3D modeling tools, kind of turning Unreal Engine into an all-in-one solution, aren't they? But yeah, definitely an interesting development there. We also have improvements in the world of the content pipeline. One of the ones I'm happiest to see is improved GLTF support. So Unreal Engine 5.3 has reliable import and export, and you'd actually be surprised at how well it can export an entire scene in GLTF, but they are going to make it better and better going forward. So you're going to have round-trip align exporter to support same extensions as the importer. So the importer and exporter are going to basically have the same feature set going forward. Material extensions are being added, so thin translucency, sheen, specular IOR and iridescence, and then animation, skeletal animation through level sequence, morph animations. That one is definitely nice to see, so GLTF animation support should be coming in. And then extensions for input of iridescence and Draco compression. We have the interchange format, so it provides users with an easy way to create extended parameterized import, re-import workflows. So import, re-import of FBX files as assets to be finalized production ready in 5.4. Support of the FBX import into level as production ready in 5.4. Updated UIs, support for USD, AXF, etc. And move the exporters, FBX, GLTF, into the interchange framework. So some improvements there. It's interesting, this is the first guy that actually gave version numbers of when these things are actually going to hit. That's probably a mistake. USD is getting more and more important in the world, and it's actually kind of impressive how well Unreal Engine actually works with USD already. But we are going to get some improvements there as well. And of course, USD is also being migrated to this new interchange framework that we just talked about a second ago. And then Material X, so better integration with Substrate. This is sort of like this next generation interchange format for textures that the industry is working on. I don't know how good Material X support is at this point, but they're looking at making it even better. So we got a lot of improvements on the UI side. Everything is basically UMG based here. Common UI is probably one of the more interesting ones. So this is a common plugin for UIs to create cross-platform UIs. And you got things like a library of commonly used widget, style data assets, separate styling from the UI, input routing system that gives UI selective interactivity, making it easier to manage focus in a multi-layered UI, support for enhanced input, support for console-specific UI such as button icons for specific controllers, and cardinal navigation management for gamepads. We also again have UMG style sheets. If you've worked with CSS, you know exactly what this is all about. So you can reuse the styles, get a consistent UI across different implementations. And then we have the quick UMG previewer, so you can preview and test how your UMG will actually work. And then we've got some new special effects for UIs here. So improved support for masking, gradients in general, post-processing across multiple widgets. Also, back buffer and other resources will be exposed to improve material workflows for UI designers and developers. So definitely some improvements on the UI front. And finally, we have the editor. And quite frankly, there's nothing overwhelmingly exciting here. An upgrade of Python to a more modern version. We're going to have some cleanup of the navigation toolbars across the editor itself. Again, nice quality of life stuff. Again, we're also going to have some improvement quality of life to the content browser, so a design overhaul to improve content discoverability, optimizing vertical and horizontal layout, and enhanced searching and filtering capabilities. I will always take improvements here because I find this process in every single game engine frustrating as hell. So again, smaller things there. Per editor preview settings, so allow you to quickly set up multiple test environments when inspecting your assets. Quality of life updates will give you access to per editor customization, so you can assign different environments and profiles based on the asset type you are working with. And yeah, that's it. That is the entirety of the roadmap of things worked on in Unreal Engine. Definitely, a lot of incremental things here, stuff we already know about. So we know Substrate's coming, but improvements there. Hardware ray tracing, definitely nice. And then we get world building tools, a new terrain system. That is definitely exciting. A lot of the rest of the stuff is more like under the scenes plumbing stuff. Obviously, we're seeing improvements to procedural generation in general, because that entire system is pretty much new to Unreal Engine. Improvements to the cooking, the caching, the shader compilation time, all that, we will take that any day. Ditto for improvements to the various different platforms that are being supported. It is kind of interesting that you're going to be able to have super high-end mobile Vulkan rendering coming at some point in the future, so I wonder if we'll go back to seeing stuff like an Infinity Blade level of mobile applications being developed using Unreal Engine, because it hasn't really been used that much in the mobile market, which I find kind of interesting. A number of improvements to the animation tools. Again, a lot of incremental stuff. Things that they've brought in-house, like the deformer tools, the new skeletal editors, and the mesh editing. The modular rigging could definitely be pretty interesting coming out of that. Again, incremental improvements to their physics and simulation and destructive systems, including cloth and flesh simulation stuff and better destruction. Audio, mostly small improvements there. A couple of neat new frameworks to play around with. Again, more tools are being brought in-house into Unreal Engine. The content pipeline is getting bumped, the UI system is getting improved, and the editor is getting some small tweaks. And that is what you can expect going forward. So we're not seeing anything massive. There's no new Lumen or Nanite type announcements here, but well, we already had them, and what more did you expect? So Proc Gen was probably the last really big update. Substrate is not going to change the world, but it is going to give you more control over your materials going forward. Definitely some interesting things coming soon with Unreal Engine, and I'm curious what here has you most excited. Let me know, comments down below, and I'll talk to you all later. Goodbye.